Well, good evening to all of you. It's fantastic to have so many of you online. Very unusual to have two key-powered speakers 2 nights in a row, but for those of you who come for 2 nights in a row, it's fantastic to have you back. Neale and I are super excited to have Clem back. You know, Clem is one of the three most respected businessmen in South Africa in terms of what has happened with helping South African business with regards to the scenarios and understanding the global and the South African environment. And we're very privileged to have Clem online tonight. And Neale, who's the owner and founder of Real Estate Investor Magazine, is actually the one that has put this together, and then it's being sponsored by Wealth Migrate and IPS. So it's a great honor and a privilege to actually welcome Neale here tonight. Welcome, Neale. It's great to have you online tonight as well.
Thanks, Scott. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Wealth Masterclass 2013 webinar series. Scott and myself have been wanting to do this for quite a while, and we're glad things are going smooth. We had a little bit of techie errors up front, but everything seems to be running. And so for those who don't know me, I'm the CEO and founder of Real Media. We publish Real Estate Investor Magazine. And yeah, so today is an introduction of one of our keynote speakers for our live Wealth Masterclass event to be held on Thursday, the 5th of September at the Bay Hotel in Camps Bay in Cape Town, and on Tuesday, the 10th of September in Johannesburg at the Sandton Convention Center. And obviously one of our keynote speakers is Clem, and I will give an introduction to him right now. And yes, and it's turned out to be the #1 wealth and investment seminar in South Africa. And if you just look at the caliber of speakers with Clem and all the other pedigreed speakers that we have, it's turned out to be a great event. So yeah, so today we are interviewing Clem Sunter. He's a global leader in scenario planning and international business. And Clem is one of the 3 most respected business personalities in South Africa. He was the ex-chairman of Anglo-American and is internationally respected for his leading technology and how best to plan for the future. Clem is also the author of 4 books, namely The Mind of a Fox, Games Foxes Played, Socrates and the Fox, and his latest version called Fox Trilogy, which is a compilation of 10 years strategic thinking. And Clem has been heavily involved in the mining sector, and I'm sure you know that in mining, things are not as they are, which I'm sure Clem will share, with you in terms of what's happening there. But also was involved in the development of our democracy and has worked with Nelson Mandela, F.W. de Klerk. And clearly he's probably the best person, I think, to give us insights, also to give us guidance on the future of South Africa, the economy, and he's well known for his low road scenarios. And Clem has certainly been voted as a speaker who's made the biggest impact on local practice. So I think we're very privileged to have you here, Clem. And so to kick off, Clem, I think I'm going to start to ask the first question. I mean, if we read the newspapers right now, we watch the news on TV, we listen to the radio,
Neale,
we see that we certainly are living in trying times. Yes?
Just before you do, I just want to share with people so that they can see where you guys are sitting there. You just send me through a little picture.
Oh, okay.
So everyone should be able to they can see that you're sitting there in Cape Town. I just the picture's coming up there, so everyone should be able to see. Anyway, back to you with the important stuff. But I just wanted to put a picture of you guys in Cape Town.
Well, thanks, Scott. So to kick off, I think I want to ask Clem, if we start reading the newspapers, which a lot of us are exposed to, we watch the news on TV, we listen to the radio, we see that we're living in trying times. Now, a lot of negativity come through. Now, a number of people on the show are entrepreneurs or they run their own businesses as well as being property investors. And many people are stuck. They're looking for answers. And if you read the front page news, it says the rand is at an all-time low, there's political uncertainty, there's foreign mining bosses rating us below Zimbabwe in some cases on labor issues, there's continuing labor disputes, irresponsible strikes, little interest from investors, so it's and really no leadership in the country. So Clem, I mean, there doesn't seem to be too much to fix it, and so people are concerned about their wealth, they're concerned about the future. Maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into that, first of all, into that scene, and I know you've got your scenario, so I know it's not a very positive way to start, but it's reality. It's in our newspapers and all over our media. So, and maybe I'd just like to say, just give us a little bit of insight to that. Why is it happening? And could this lead to absolute economic disaster, or could it be just lessons that we learn along the way?
Well, you know, I mean, South Africa's always had headaches, you know, and we tend to exaggerate the headaches and ignore some of the very positive things that have happened. I mean, I was at a school in Johannesburg the other day, St. John's College, and one of its ex-pupils won the Tour de France. Chris Froome.
Sure.
You know, he wears the yellow jersey. I mean, how many schools in the world can boast a winner of the Tour de France? And we've got so many pockets of excellence like that in this country. And one of the very quirky things is here we've just gone through a lot of negative factors, but over the last few weeks, the JSE has been hitting record highs. And yes, part of it is obviously the devaluation of the rand against the dollar. But even in dollar terms, our stock market, I think, measured from about 1990 to 2012, in dollars, we were the best performing stock market in the world. Wow. It's amazing.
That's incredible.
So yeah. We have a lot of fantastic entrepreneurs, wealth creators in South Africa. And if we can only combine that with a government that actually understands the importance of business and entrepreneurs, this will be one of the great nations. Because, as I say to people, one of the principal determinants of a nation's destiny is its demographics. And we're on a continent with probably the best demographics over the next 20 to 30 years in terms of young people growing up and obviously starting businesses and spending their money in their 20s and 30s on their families. Whereas a place like Europe is getting very old, and it's beginning to show the same problems that Japan has shown for the last 23 years, which is a flat economy. And yes, Germany is still world class, and so, you know, one can still expect economic growth from Germany. America has still got good demographics, and that's why, in fact, you were so right at the last seminar to say that America is probably the #1 nation in terms of property investment if you choose your areas carefully. And boy, if you had selected the right areas, you would have done extremely well in dollar terms over the last year. And of course, you'd have had the depreciation of the rand against the dollar, which would have improved your rand returns even more. So what I'm really getting at is this isn't too bad as an economy. We've got some very smart business leaders and entrepreneurs here. And what's more, you can make money in a flat market if you are intelligent. And what I say to people is we've moved from the age of information, because we all have access, like we're right at this moment on our PCs and smart devices. We all have access to information. So now we're into the age of intelligence. And what you have to do now is invest intelligently, and you will make money.
So, I mean, that's absolutely fantastic in terms of your advice. I mean, it really is in terms of all the technology that you've put together. And I mean, it's world recognized in terms of where you are. But tell us, in terms of what you've learned, Clem, in terms of the global financial crisis, what would you say are the biggest 3 lessons that you've actually learned over the last 5 years or so, based on all the scenario planning and all the world leaders that you get to deal with and the business leaders?
Okay. The 3 lessons for business are these. The #1 is you've got to innovate nowadays. It's not like it was in the 80s and 90s when you had a long boom and you could just grow your business, and it was wonderful because you just would be slightly slower or faster in sales growth than your competitors. Now, if you don't innovate and you don't produce new products regularly or new services regularly, your business can firstly stagnate, but secondly, you can go out of business. I mean, I look at Apple, for example. Apple was the king of innovation when Steve Jobs was alive. And now they're not fighting to stay alive, but they're hitting the same problems that many of the other big IT companies have had, like IBM and Microsoft. They're kind of entering a flatter zone. And so that's the first big lesson, is you've got to be innovative now in order to grow your business. The second big lesson, which I've learned from doing work with multinational clients, is it's no good just intelligently advertising your brand. You've actually got to live it so that you get across to customers that you offer a value, and even if you charge a slightly higher price than your competitors, it's value for money. And you don't just do that by having clever ads, you do it by having all your frontline staff that interact with the public actually living out the brand. I've recently done a roadshow around South Africa with the #1 estate agency in South Africa from a property sales point of view, value of property sales, and it's REMAX. And REMAX wasn't even here 15 years ago, and now they're #1, and it's because they have this passion in telling their franchisees, who are the estate agents, how to interact with the public to ensure that there's a consistency of the brand. And then the third lesson is that you should have some cheaper alternatives, because price really counts these days. And if you look in South Africa at the companies that have done very well, it's companies like ShopRite Checkers, Mr. Price, those people who are considered that you can go and buy a golf shirt there. It's only going to cost you a third of what it costs in the Golf Pro shop. It was a matter of choice 10 years ago. Now it is absolutely essential to do that, because there's something which is called the wedge, which is happening in the UK, and it's beginning to happen here, which is you run out of money round about the 20th of the month. And then you have to live on baked beans for the rest of the month. And the only way that you can actually buy things on top of your petrol bills and your electricity bills and all the other critical expense bills is to actually look for the cheaper alternative. So when we do work, Chantal Ilbury and myself, with our clients, we say those are the three big lessons. You've got to innovate, you've got to live your brand so that you're convincing people you offer value for money, and you've got to have something in your portfolio that offers the cheaper alternative.
Okay, so if we had to take it on from there, Clem, those are the lessons. What are the mistakes that that you've made in hindsight that seemed obvious?
Yeah, look, the mistakes which many companies make is that when they are very large, they think they are absolutely, yeah, they're immune. They're immune to economic circumstances. And I can speak about my own company, Anglo American. You know, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we bought many businesses in South Africa. We expanded. In fact, in the 80s, we were the largest mining company in the world. We were #1. And in fact, if Forbes magazine had foreign investors, a list of foreign investors in America, and we were #1. It was a South African company that was the #1 foreign investor in America in the early 80s. And now we're #5 as a mining company. And we've lost a lot of the status that we had in the 1980s. And I think the principal reason is this, that the bigger you get, the more it is difficult to adapt to the changing circumstances of the market, which are beyond your control. And as I say to people, you know, you don't have foxes the size of elephants. You know, because you haven't got a quickness of response. And I think that that is probably the biggest mistake of big businesses, is that they lose that critical facility to adapt as the market changes and as games disappear and new games open up. You can do it as a small business, but it's very, very difficult as a large business. And then the second mistake that I don't think we really made, but a lot of companies made during the good times, was to just take on too much debt. And I mean, it wasn't just companies, it was individuals, it was governments. And now, of course, we're paying for the consequences, which is one of the reasons we've got a fairly flat global economy, is that everybody's having to get their financial houses in order. And unfortunately, the one nation that it really hasn't come to terms with this is America, because America's national debt is around $17 trillion. And just to give people an idea of what that means, it means if you repay that debt at $1 a second, which is $32 million a year, because there's 32 million seconds in a year, it will take you 530,000 years to repay that debt. Now, if you go back 535,000 years, there wasn't much on this planet. And so America has racked up this ginormous debt. And yes, there has been some in their budget. They couldn't have done anything, so they had to take an automatic cut. But they haven't come to terms yet with the fact that they cannot go on living off the Chinese, who, lucky for them, are still buying US treasuries, because one day the Chinese might pull the plug and then they're in real trouble. So that would be, for me, the other big mistake that a lot of companies made during the good times. They just took on too much debt.
Clem, if you said, I mean, you mentioned America, and you even mentioned 12 months ago in terms of those people that necessarily took action and have seen, good results in terms of the values going up and the rand devaluing. But across the whole economy and the global economy, if you take the last 5 years, what would you have done, considering everything that's happened, what would you have done 5 years ago when the global financial crisis started? That with the benefit of hindsight, looks really easy, but obviously now knowing what we know, what do you think would have been some of the action steps you would like to have taken?
Well, I personally think that Ben Bernanke has been right, because he's zeroed interest rates, and it is still too early to say whether the recovery is because the patient is in ICU with a drip called zero interest rates. And once you reduce that drip or withdraw it, you don't know whether the patient is going to survive, on his own. We've still got to see whether that is the case. But the fact is, the world was in a critical state in 2007, 2008. And I think Ben Bernanke, by doing that, by literally offering unlimited dollars to buy bonds in America to keep interest rates down, in retrospect, was absolutely right. And last year, I did a session with European banks in Zurich in July last year, looking at the future of the Eurozone, and they were quite pessimistic. But the European Central Bank has solved that, because they have gone the same way as America. They've literally made euros freely available to Spain and to Italy to keep the interest rate on their 10-year bonds down to 4.5%, because everybody knows that if the interest rate on those bonds climbs to over 7% per annum, then you're in default territory. So yes, we still don't know whether the patient's going to come out of ICU, but that's, in retrospect, what I feel very happy about, and I don't think I'm clever enough to have done what Bernanke did, but in retrospect, I certainly agree with that approach.
Okay, so Clem, what are the three biggest trends which are happening at the moment, having set that whole scenario?
Well, the first one is, and we talked about it at the last seminar, is the aging of the advanced economies. Japan has had a flat 23 years because, it's essentially in a geriatric boom. And yes, if you sell walking sticks and hearing aids, good for business. But if you're sort of in the restaurant business, not so good, because old people don't eat as much, and also old people don't innovate as much. And so Japan's had this very flat 23 years. Europe, I think, is going to go through the same problems. And America, luckily, has younger demographics. It's got a growing population. Its critical age group from consumer spending, the 35 to 45 age group, is still growing relatively fast. So America can be set apart from Europe and Japan, and probably will grow economically at 2 to 3%, whereas Europe will probably be stuck like Japan in the 0 to 1%. But I have to say that Germany might be an exception and have a slightly higher growth rate. So that's the first trend. And of course, the second trend is that companies are moving to the emerging economies I know that they've taken a beating just recently because of interest rates in the United States rising, and so people withdrawing currencies from some of the emerging markets, particularly places like India, and putting it back in America. But you can't get around the fact that those economies have younger demographics, and that's why so many American and European companies are all over Africa like a rash. It's because they have a much higher sales growth of their products here than in places like Europe and America. So that's the second megatrend, which I don't see stopping, is you're going to see still huge interest in successful emerging economies. Again, you've got to be picky on that, but that is the second trend. The third trend is quite off the wall, but it does affect property. I've always said that climate change is for real. I did some work back in the late 80s with some of South Africa's best environmentalists. In fact, we wrote a book together with Brian Huntley and Roy Siegfried, and we called it South African Environments into the 21st Century. And we said it's not the gradual rise in temperature that is the cause for worry. It's the greater frequency of extreme events. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I did a session in London with some of the best international experts on climate change. And I had the advisor to Tony Blair at the time, and also the 2 advisors to the US Senate as part of this workshop. And they both said exactly the same thing, that the really worrying thing is the frequency of extreme events. Well, boy, oh boy, this year you have seen that in space. We're seeing it in Cape Town at the moment with the rain. But gee, China has had, floods which they haven't had in 100 years. Europe, the Danube, reached levels again which it hasn't reached in 100 years. So if you had property on the Danube, you probably really suffered. And in America, you've had twisters that have taken out whole suburbs, not just a few houses, whole suburbs. And now you've got the extreme heat causing major fires. I mean, Yosemite, which is one of the greatest tourist attractions on earth, is basically ablaze at the moment. In the middle of Australia, the temperature actually hit 54 degrees centigrade. And in fact, they've introduced a new temperature range in the middle of Australia, which is called deep purple, which is any temperature in excess of 50 degrees consistently. And so, you've now got to figure in climate change in where you buy property, because everybody buys on a beachfront. But if the sea level is rising, not such a smart thing to do. And same with buying on rivers and stuff like that. You've got to figure in what climate change can do in terms of rainfall, in terms of severe sort of tornadoes and stuff like that, into your choice of where you live and where you buy property.
So, Clem, you're saying that I've got a bit of a problem. I've just bought a house on Teeson Island on the lake because I love the beach, but clearly I'm about to go into the sea.
Are you floating, Scott?
No, but it's, I mean, it's I actually talked to a lady who was involved in Homeland Security in America. In fact, I think she was the real-life figure for the TV series Homeland in America, and she now works at MIT. And I said to her, "What are the biggest threats facing America, in the work that you did?" And she said 2, and both of them have been absolutely plumb on. The first, she said, was self-radicalization. And she was dead right about that, because look at the Boston bombers. They came out of nowhere. They sort of self-radicalized, and yeah, it caused a terrible incident in America. And there's maybe lots more people like that in America who just flip. And of course, there's no way with police records and intelligence, you know exactly when that moment is. But her second one was climate change. And she said, you know why it's the biggest threat facing America? It's because we don't regard it as a threat. So there you go. I mean, I'm not saying that you're going to be overwhelmed yet. So
I was just keep my canoe on my first floor balcony, so I can. Clem, from
Yeah.
you know, I've had the privilege of watching you speak many times and following you for a number of years, and obviously you talk a lot about the global economy and your different scenarios for the global economy. And I know you're going to go into a lot more detail at Neale's Wealth Masterclass. But just where do you think we are in terms of the global economy? I know you've got a very sophisticated technology along with Chantal, but just kind of as an overview, where do you think we are in terms of the global economy at the moment?
Well, we're in a recovery mode, so I am certainly slightly more um, optimistic, and we've changed the probability slightly on our outlying scenarios, giving a slightly higher probability, sharing the probabilities between a full recovery and a double dip. So we've become, we just feel that Bernanke and the European Central Bank have done a decent job, and therefore the chances of a second major dip are definitely dropping. I mean, having said that, I have to say that this whole thing over Syria could just erupt into something ginormous. I mean, think about it. That the First World War was caused by some guy just taking out another guy on a horse who happened to be an archduke. and that started the First World War. And I mean, who think? I actually think it's that David Cameron is very wise to go to the British Parliament. I'm not sure what Obama's going to do about this, but everybody kind of talks as though Syria is just going to absorb a sort of relatively sort of small level of punishment, a rap on the knuckles, don't use chemical weapons again. But heaven knows what's going to happen if Syria is attacked. And it could bring in Israel, it could bring in all kinds of other countries. So, that's the kind of black swan event that could completely change the picture. But for the time being, our favorite scenarios continue to be a kind of flat world, on the one hand, or possibly a two-speed world where emerging economies do as 3 times better in growth terms than the old world economies. But the critical flag is China, because China has to grow fast for the emerging economies to do well. So, we're still, our mainframe scenarios are between a kind of fairly flat world with America doing better than Europe, and possibly on top of that, the emerging market doing much better. But really, it's the prospects of China that you have to watch. And we're still worried about the demographic cliff in China caused by the one-child policy. We're still worried about property in China and the amount of money that's been lent by the banks to municipalities to construct suburbs, and a lot of people aren't moving in. And so there could be serious price retreat, because prices of property in China have risen quite fast over the last year. And then thirdly, China's becoming an expensive economy, and they've got to move now from replication to innovation, just like the Japanese did in the 80s. And if you think about it, China hasn't produced a world-beating product for a long time. So, we've got to watch China very carefully to see whether it can continue to grow at 7.5%, 8%, or whether it's going to fall below 5%. But yeah, we kind of still run fairly close to one another the scenarios that we call hard times for everybody and ultraviolet, which is a two-speed world where the old world goes to the U and the new world has a V-like recovery.
Clem, when we started, I set quite a negative scenario in terms of the media, what's in the media. But I think, what's in the general media generally is always bad news. Doesn't matter whether the economy is up or down. And you alluded to that the JSE had some of their best performance in years. How do you see the South African economy in relation to the rest of the world? What are your thoughts on that particular area?
Well, we are definitely becoming a worry. I mean, you can see it with this mining, Lekotla, that's taking place, where, you showed me a newspaper today which said that we're ranked below Zimbabwe. I've never heard about that before, but I know that people are desperately worried that there isn't policy certainty in the mining industry, and nobody's going to invest 500 million or a billion rand in putting in a new mine if that mine is suddenly going to be taken away from them by the state because it's considered a strategic asset. So the government has to stabilize the rules of the game in mining. Apart from that, you know, South Africa is not doing too badly. I mean, I personally feel, you know, from living here, this is better to be here than, say, in Britain because, you know, people are still working. There isn't that sort of desperation in the economy that you have in many European economies. And it's because we've got so many good businesses. But the real thing we have to do in order to create a stable future is to have an economic CODESA where we bring the captains of industry together with the government to construct enough space in our economy to grow another 1 million new enterprises, because the only way we're going to create 5 million jobs is to create 1 million new enterprises. And that's my sort of mantra. And so Jacob Zuma should change. And all these guys who talk about job creation should change. It's not about job creation. It's about enterprise creation. And yeah, that is the key to the future of our economy, is that we actually sit down to construct the space that other African countries have for their entrepreneurs, and which are now growing at 7 to 8%. We're stuck between 2 and 3% when the rest of the continent is growing at this much higher rate. And so, yeah, we've got to learn our lessons, and we've got to, I feel, have a proper negotiation through an economic CODESA.
Clem, I just want to extend a little bit on that because, you know, both Scott and myself, we go worldwide. We attend all these events similar to like Wealth Masterclass. And, you know, there's a lot of inspirational people who are millionaires who built businesses, invested into property, that kind of stuff. And we see, and certainly there's a trend to a lot of overseas companies, Americans coming into South Africa, trying to get entrepreneurs off the ground, trying to energize them, bring a new kind of energy, new kind of business sort of ethic and you know, sort of modus operandi in South Africa. And it's clear, would you agree that it's, I mean, you know, we need entrepreneurship to drive our economy forward? I mean, would you kind of, are you in line with that? And is it good to bring in outside economies like America here, or do we have the South African way?
No, I mean, I'm all for having Americans here because they are the ultimate entrepreneurs. And certainly if they're trying to help our own entrepreneurs, they've probably got more experience at doing that than any other nation on earth. But in the end, it's all about space. You know, nobody really helped Kenya to become the foremost nation in Africa on IT. I mean, they're inventing applications for smart devices, like you can pay your retail bill by swiping your cell phone at the checkout. You know, and it's called the M-Peso system. And America is now seriously considering turning what they call the mobiles into electronic wallets based on the Kenyan system. Now, the government didn't organize that. They just created the space. And what they did also is that they had a rah. They kind of glorified the entrepreneurs. Here in South Africa, we don't do that. Yeah. I mean, one foreign investor said to me the other day, overseas, people roll out the red carpet for him. In South Africa, they roll out the red tape. so, you know, I mean, we just have a bureaucracy second to none. We have a government that doesn't really believe in the profit motive because it's considered, you know, considered doubtful. It's not part of the socialist agenda to make a profit. And we've got to change all that because there is no example on earth of a country that hasn't if you subdue the profit motive, has actually grown its economy. It doesn't exist. Chile learned the lesson and now is one of the most successful economies in South Africa. Brazil learned the lesson after that. Cuba, which we use as a sort of socialist example, is learning now to grow its entrepreneurs. And of course, the ultimate example is China, where Deng came in after Mao. He retreated the party from the economy and allowed international and local entrepreneurs to make money for themselves. And China went from the 100th ranked economy in the world in 1978 to number 2 today. And it's one of the very uncomfortable things for people who believe in democracy like me, that it was a one-party authoritarian system that has actually been the highest performing nation on earth over the last 30 years. And so that's what we've got to do, is we've got to recognize our entrepreneurs and we've got to create the space. Look at America. You know, one of the great Americans now is Elon Musk. Where was he educated? Pretoria Boys High. And now he's regarded as the leading edge of American scientific entrepreneurs. And he's proposed a high-speed tube between San Francisco and LA. He sent a very successful space shuttle up to the lab, the first commercial space flight, and of course he's had PayPal and a few other things. You know, in America, they love him. They love him. He appears on Bloomberg. He appears on all the American chat programs. Here in South Africa, nobody talks about Elon Musk. And they don't talk about the equivalent of Elon Musk in South Africa either. So I don't know how we get it across to the government here that they must start creating a climate that makes entrepreneurs into champions, and then they've got to be lauded to the skies. And in fact, we should name half the streets in Cape Town and Johannesburg and Port Elizabeth and Nelspruit and everywhere after entrepreneurs, not old politicians.
But you know, Clem, it's funny. I actually heard something in the last 3 days, which I think sums up what you're trying to say. Do you know that the number of politicians, people in government, in both North and South America put together is 1.1 million people? And in South Africa, which is one little country at the bottom of a continent, we've got 1.3 million people in government. So, you know, compensation drives behavior. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we've got in terms of getting them to see the benefit of.
It's not just that, Scott. It's the fact that we've got 16 million people on handouts. On handouts. Yeah. We've got 5 million taxpayers and 16 million people on handouts out of a population of 52 million. And my view is very strongly that we've got to turn as many of those 16 million people into entrepreneurs doing their own thing. Even if you only have a 10% hit rate, that's 1.6 million entrepreneurs. If they employ one person each, that's 3.2 million jobs. That is the way you're going to solve the job problem in South Africa. It is not with big industrial policies or, you know, some gigantic thing. You know, our major projects are in trouble, like, for example, the Medupi Power project, where we had no work on site for 4 months between the middle of December and the middle of April. And now we've just had another 3 weeks of no work on the Medupi Power site. So we're not very good at the big projects, but we do have a lot of entrepreneurs in the townships, and we've got to support them, we've got to recognize them, and we've got to give them a ladder so that they can go from being a township business into the mainstream economy. In that sense, I am an economic freedom fighter as much as Julius.
Well, just before I move on to that question, I think I actually read a quote by Nelson Mandela about a month ago that I think sums up what you're trying to say perfectly, Clem. He said, "Getting money will not bring you freedom. Learning how to create it will." And I think that sums up perfectly what you're actually saying in terms of entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. Nelson was dead right. I mean, I saw him for 5 hours when he was in Victor Verster in a little cottage because he'd read one of my books before he was released. He didn't tell me he was about to be released, but he asked me to go and see him. And so I had a one-on-one with him for 5 hours. And he was absolutely magnificent because he was open. You know, he wasn't sort of trying to overwhelm me with socialist stuff, which he'd sort of gone into jail with. He was actually saying, what is it that we can do to turn South Africa into a winning nation? He was a fox. He adapted because, you know, he'd seen what had happened to many socialist economies. And unfortunately, we still got so many very intellectual people in the ANC who are stuck in this old socialist groove. And when I see the kind of words that they use, I think, isn't it interesting that young black South Africans are using dead white Russian lingo?
Well,
We can create our own model, and our own model must be one of African entrepreneurship.
it's really interesting that you say that. And I know, again, at the Wealth Masterclass, you're going to go into the 3 scenarios for South Africa and the probabilities of them. But I really wanted to ask this question, and I know it's a contentious question, but as a 36-year-old South African, I want to kind of understand. You're in the mining industry, you're close to what is happening, and what impact has Malema? How much of a threat is he, or is he something good for South Africa, or what are your thoughts on it? Obviously, with him coming back in the last couple of months.
Well, I mean, I have to say to the audience out there that I had not seen any of these questions. So when I answered the previous question, I had no idea that this was the next question. And the answer is this. I don't know how important Julius is to our future, because I don't know how his trial's going to go in November, or whether SARS is going to attach his assets so that he can't hold public office. There's a whole bunch of threats which face Julius Malema before the general election next year. But if you ask me about him, I say 2 things. He got the analysis of the problems correct, in that he taps into serious young black frustration. Our unemployment rate amongst young people 18 to 24 is running at 50%. I mean, the only other nation that I know that comes close to that is Spain. And I mean, young people don't get angry because they're living under a particular political system. They get really angry when they haven't got job prospects, or the prospects of opening a business, or whatever. In other words, to actually go out and earn money and have a decent life. That's when they get really angry. And Julius Malema has tapped into that anger. But having said that, his solutions are absolutely tragic. I mean, it could just lead to a civil war in South Africa, because nobody is going to be prepared to give up their assets for free. And we're talking banks, we're talking mines, we're talking all kinds of industries that are considered strategic, and wholesale confiscation will just lead to a very, very, very tense situation in South Africa. So I don't believe his solutions are correct. I want the solution to be to free up our economy, to create a new generation of entrepreneurs. And when I talk to young people, they find my talk very popular, because they want to do their own thing. In the days of Facebook and Twitter and all these things, they don't want to be a slave for the government. They don't want to work in some vast organization as a little somebody down the line. They want to start their own business. They want to work their own hours. They want to create their own space. They want to do all these things. And it would have been so much better for Julius Malema to have analyzed the problem like he's done, but then offer this type of solution. It's much more in tune with what young people want. They don't want to be civil servants. They don't want to work for public works programs. They don't want to work for big corporations like Anglo. They want to do their own thing. So, yeah, I think that depending on how the case against him goes, we could see some big surprises in the next election if the EFF actually can really stand and make a dent on young voters. In fact, I wrote an article for News 24 the other day where I said it could even mean that the ANC has to go into coalition with the DA in order to retain a majority. I mean, that's the kind of threat that he could pose if all things fall into place for him, because he taps into a very big amount of anger out there.
So Neale, that brings risk.
Neale, sorry, just before we move on, Neale, Just before
Yeah.
we move on, I think
Yes.
it's useful to speak to the audience quickly. Who here,
Yes.
just write in the question box and just tell us whether you think that Malema is a risk or not a risk, or what your thoughts are. Let's keep you awake. At the end of the day, if you actually interact, you're going to get a hell of a lot more out of this webinar than if you just sit passively listening. So just tell us, what are your thoughts? Obviously, Clem's given us his thoughts. What do you guys think, basically? Just type in there whether you think it is a threat or not a threat, or whether the court case is going to make him go away, or what it is. Let's just see what everyone's thoughts are here. So I can see Rob Smith has said on this subject, how to see Mugabe in Zimbabwe for the immediate future. Leon says yes. We need to manipulate Malema. What does everyone else say? We've got a lot of people here online tonight. Let's see what he's
One
doing.
other thing is this. One of the flags, because you'll hear when I do the talk of the thing, is you got to look for the flags on these kind of things. And Kenny Kaneni coming in as a super rich guy and saying that he's going to be the driving force behind the EFF and promptly resigning a few days ago, that is a flag that obviously all is not well in the EFF. And, I don't know where Julius is going to get his money from now. And so, my probabilities on him really making a big success out of the election are definitely lower than, say, 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Okay. Sorry, over to you, Neale. We've got some fantastic comments coming through, but I just thought we'd see what everyone else's thoughts were.
Okay, is there any other ones you want to add to that, Scott? Are there any
there's hundreds here. It's I couldn't read through all of them, but it's very interesting just to let everyone have their opinion, because it obviously makes them think about the question more.
Well, why don't you share one or two with us?
Okay, so Vincent says, I think Malema will not go into government as an official because of his upcoming trial. The ANC will put him in jail to immobilize him. Cicelo said, I think talking about Malema all the time is making him more popular. I think we should rather focus on all our energies on the solutions to the problems he has identified. I think that's a great comment. I agree, Malema represents a huge constituent. Eric said that. Billy said, Mugabe wannabe. Graham said, what do you need to know is that he is a clever fool and he is a threat because he appeals to exactly what the takers want to hear. So, look, there's plenty of comments and I think different opinions, but I really think that probably, Cicelos probably summed it up best, and I think Clem's given us some good solutions as to how we can, because at the end of the day, if we can create employment and we can give people jobs, then his message becomes less redundant,
Yeah, well, what I want is if he succeeds in overcoming all his sort of distressing issues, I would like to redirect his energy into saying we do have a lopsided economy and we've got to correct that by creating an entirely new generation of entrepreneurs, the majority of whom will be black. Yeah.
Okay, so Clem, that gives risk and uncertainty for investors. I mean, what do they do? What are their options for if we had to ask investors in this particular scenario that we've just spoken about?
Well, I like that. Disordered, bewildered, unclear, perplexed. Look, my view is very simple about investment, is that you have to be diversified. I'm diversified. My dad taught me to put a third of my money into property, a third of my money into the stock market, and to have a third of my money in cash and bonds. And then he said, every 2 or 3 years, review the percentages. And if you've done well in property, sell down back to a third, a third, a third. If you've done well in equities, do the same. So in fact, he unwittingly used Buffett's great phrase, be greedy when other people are fearful, and be fearful when other people are greedy, so that when the market had done well and you're up to 50% of your portfolio in equities and everybody's saying rah, 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 he said sell back to 1/3. And so it was a very, very nice formula, that. And I've used it very successfully. And, it means that you don't look at the future. You just let the future do it for you. And then you balance your portfolio again every 2 or 3 years, depending upon what's performed well. Because I guess the underlying assumption is what's performed really well won't go on performing as well as what's performed badly, which will make a comeback. And of course, you see that in in many places in property, that like London and New York and other cities, prices didn't fall that much during the recession, but they haven't risen that much since. But if you've chosen places, I think you're talking about Phoenix,
Yes.
where property prices have just gone through the roof, and in the US, and I mean not 20% a year, sometimes 20% a month. So I mean, it's a very, very good formula that for handling uncertainty. You don't look at the future. You just have the third, a third, a third, and every 2 or 3 years you rebalance your portfolio.
So obviously offshore becomes a desirable destination.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
you know, and so diversity means obviously those three things, but locally and offshore. But I'm not for one moment saying that people should put a large amount of money offshore now, because people did that in 2000 and then they got their fingers burnt because the rand came soaring back. And some people lost 20 or 30% of their money offshore in rand terms as a result of the rand coming back. Sure. So yes, we're going through a period now where your money offshore has made big rand gains. But if you take a 5-year view, which most economists do, it'll show you that the rand appreciates against the US dollar at the differential rate of inflation. So if we're inflating at 7% per annum and the US is at 2%, then the rand will devalue at 5% per annum against the US dollar.
Right. Quite actually interesting, Clem. Since 1990, it's actually been sitting at 5.6% year on year as a straight line graph. So it's very similar to what you've just said.
Well, there you go. And in that sense, you've got to obviously have the 3 asset categories in South Africa, and then obviously with money overseas, as far as possible, you've got to have a similar kind of spread in asset categories. Yeah.
I mean, that's you've actually touched on it already, but I mean, a lot of questions we get asked all the time are, should we be investing locally? Should we be investing offshore? And I think you've actually answered that in quite a lot of detail. There's pros and cons to both. And I certainly took a huge amount away from your different scenarios in terms of the global economy and the local economy. And the one thing I learned from you a couple of years ago is that there's actually no right or wrong answer to this. In fact, I loved your analogy where you said, how confident are you about the future? And if you say, let's for argument's sake, say 70% confident with South Africa, then you should invest 70% in South Africa and 30% offshore. But just in terms of your feelings, in terms of the whole local versus offshore, what are your gut feels, or have you pretty much answered that already with regards to the diversification?
Yeah, I'd hate to. I'm not well equipped in the field of property to know where the obvious gains are. I just remember at your last seminar, that South African property hadn't fallen that much. Not the good property in South Africa. It really, obviously leisure property has fallen hugely, and I think it will continue to fall. So if you're invested in some of these leisure estates, or you've got an equity stake in a game lodge or something like that, I'm afraid to say hard times means that people worry about the fees they're paying for the game reserve, and the monthly levy starts looming large and stuff like that. So specifically in South Africa at the moment, the one sector that's doing badly is leisure property. But on the other hand, there have been some very good deals done recently, particularly in the high end of the property market. And, certainly the property companies haven't done too badly in international terms. So I'd hate to say, gosh, you should really, spend most of your time looking for, very good international property investments. But, obviously, if you're selective, you can make a bucket load of money overseas. And yeah, I must say that all the advice you gave at that last seminar was absolutely correct. And so, yeah, I mean, the only other thing I would say is I would tend to invest in cities that have a future, because, you know, there are cities which are dying because the game that underpins them is dying. I mean, Detroit has lost people because, you know, the automobile game in America has diminished because of Japanese competition, German competition, and stuff like that. I would say Perth now is very vulnerable because, you know, I don't know what the iron ore price is going to be over the next 10 years, but the one thing that's certain is those big, huge iron ore deposits in Western Australia are going to diminish in size. And then you have the classic kind of decline of a ghost town, except it's a ghost city. So, you know, you've got to look at the underlying economic circumstances of the sort of the region or the city that you're investing in, to see whether the game is expanding or whether the game is diminishing. And of course, some cities like Glasgow and Edinburgh and others in the UK have changed games. They've gone for culture and arts and other things, and away from shipbuilding and the stuff that's declined in the UK. So again, you've got to look at how much that city has a spirit of innovation in choosing new games.
I think.
Okay, Clem, so,
sorry.
Okay, sorry, Scott, carry on.
Just very quickly. I mean, I think one of the things that we're going to do at the Wealth Masterclass is go into quite a lot of detail. And what Clem was actually referring to in February, the last webinar we did was the global property system, where we took Clem's scenario planning and we overlaid it in a 4-dimensional model in terms of the different areas around the world. And you can go from a macro to a micro point. And the purpose tonight is not to go into the details of this, but, you know, the reason most people lose money is actually because they do stuff on gut feel, and they need to have a system to be able to do it. And one thing we'll be sharing at the Wealth Masterclass is actually the system. We've now created a book around it so that people can understand it. And once they understand the system, they can then use their own intelligence to make educated and informed decisions. So I just thought I would share that with, and it's one of the big values of coming along to the event live, because it can be explained properly.
And then ping, you look at the yellow, and there you are.
That's a place to be, yeah? It's the US of A.
But not in all cities in the US.
Yes.
Not in all cities.
Very much
Yeah.
so. Well, look, I mean, I think, Clem, you know, tonight's not the environment, but a lot of South Africans underestimate. I mean, America's got 300 MSAs, which stand for Metropolitan Statistical Area, whereas South Africa have like 15. So, you know, when someone tells you the American market's going up or down, they're actually lying, because somewhere like Detroit, they've shut down 25% of the city, you know. So one has to be very careful. And that's why I said it's not just a macro thing, it's also a micro thing, you know.
Yeah.
Neale, over to you.
I would say the other place that I would worry about from a climate change point of view is Palm Springs and Las Vegas, because temperatures there are getting to a level where, you know, people just find it uncomfortable to live. I mean, Las Vegas now has to have sprays every 25 to 50 meters for people to walk in summer, because they can't actually make it down the street.
Well, that along with the inconsistency of the population and the economy gives another reason not to invest there.
Yeah, so Clem, I think it's all up on the screen over there. I mean, obviously we're looking forward to seeing you at the Wealth Masterclass. So obviously maybe we can just touch on in terms of the things that you are going to cover there. You'll be giving us the scenarios, and I know you've got your percentages and your.
Yeah.
So maybe just give us a little bit of more depth of what you're going to kind of.
Well, I want to go through. I definitely want to go through the methodology again,
right,
of, you know, how you use scenarios, because you can't forecast. Nobody actually really knows where the world's going to be in 5 years' time. So the idea of being a prophet and forecasting what's going to happen over the next 5 years is ridiculous. You've actually got to play different possibilities, which we call scenarios. But that's not enough. Just to play different possibilities doesn't sort of help people. You've got to give them the flags which would indicate that a particular scenario or possibility is in play, and then you've got to watch that flag. And as the flag goes up, you increase the probability the scenario. And you don't do it with a mathematical model because the future only happens once. And a lot about the future is determined by animal spirits, in other words, one's emotional, irrational side. And like what's going to happen in Syria could be determined emotionally rather than rationally. And therefore, you apply probabilities to the scenarios, but that's only half the point. You've got to then look at the consequences of the scenarios for you, your family, your business, and of course, in your case, for property. And then you've got to decide based on the impact of that scenario and the probability what you're going to do about it. And then guess what? You've got to turn what you're going to do about it into action. And the one thing I'm going to stress is something I learned from one of the best consultants in the world on turning decisions into action. He's an American who worked for GE for a long time and is now considered one of the top guys in terms of implementation of strategy. And he said, Clem, it has nothing to do with rationality and logic and things like that. It's to do with emotion. So if you want to go from a decision to action, you've got to get people emotionally involved in the decision, and then they will execute it. So take our National Development Plan, 450 pages on the internet. Very few people have read it. Very few people know what it's about. They hear the word NDP endlessly, but they don't know what it's about. The government hasn't bothered, or the National Planning Commission hasn't bothered to issue a pamphlet in CNA, in exclusive books, to say to people, here are the 10 most important points on the plan. What are you going to do to implement it? And maybe you should have had a DVD or something, which you could hire out at video shops. When I did the high road, low road scenarios in the mid-80s, I did a video on the presentation, and it was second to Michael Jackson's Thriller in video sales in South Africa for 1987. It was, it was one of the most popular videos, and people started buying in and emotionally getting involved in making the high road materialize. And so I'm going to really concentrate on that last aspect, because the South African situation, we have this crisis of implementation. We have a crisis of implementation in government in terms of service delivery. We have a crisis of implementation in the private sector because they're not creating the space for a new generation of entrepreneurs. So I want to concentrate on how we get the emotional buy-in for South Africa to continue down the high road, to continue to be a member of what I call the Premier League of Nations.
Who was that American Clem that you referred to?
No, he's a professor at MIT,
right.
And he's what he tries to do. And because I've asked him, can I kind of quote you left, right, and center? And he said, no, Clem, I don't want you to do that, because I don't want to raise expectations in South Africa. I'm going to come here, hopefully in the next 2 years, and I'm going to blow you all away. So I'm going to let him be the surprise that he wants to be.
So it's also a matter of just simplifying the plan, as opposed to just sort of,
no, but his point was, it's not logic that makes you convert a decision into action.
Right.
It's actually
emotion.
It's actually emotion. It's a totally different part of your brain.
Yeah.
And so many consultants kind of, try and analyze how you turn a decision into an action, and they put down little steps, and they do this and they do that. This guy's saying it's actually not that. It's actually creating that real kind of passion that football fans have, and others have. That's what makes people do things.
Yeah.
And it's something that I don't know of any consultant in South Africa that actually does this kind of work. And for me, it's a new, thrilling area. So, you've got to have the scenarios, you've got to have the flags, you've got to have the probabilities, you've got to look at the impact and the consequences of the scenarios. It's all analytical, logical stuff with a bit of intuition flow, for the probabilities. But then you've got to say, what are my options, and which options am I going to exercise right now in terms of decisions? And then you've got to say, how am I going to build up a sufficient passion in myself and my staff and or my family or whatever it is to actually make it happen.
Well, I mean, Clem, on that note, I mean, that's what the whole Wealth Masterclass is actually all about. I mean, the speakers, a lot of them are, it's emotive sort of, well, it's emotive methodologies. I mean, Scott and myself, we've been all around the world to see the likes of Tony Robbins, who's a change agent in people, and yeah, we've got the, you know, Donald Trump Jr. I mean, you know, Donald Trump became wealthy through one deal that he actually did in 40 Wall Street, which he bought for $1 million US, which today is worth something like 465,000 US dollars. I mean,
465 million, Neil. I mean, 465 million.
Yes.
If it was 465,000, the American market would have seriously fallen.
It's a million. I did get a correction here from Clem. And then, but I think what we're getting is the insights into what the Trumps do. What is that mindset all about? And a lot of it is emotive type things which they've done. Dolph as well. I think you know, you've met Dolph last year. He was at our Wealth Masterclass, and his methodologies on investing offshore. And I mean, he's a Kiwi originally, but he's well traveled and also well invested around the world. And is one of the few that's actually shared, you know, where and how to invest around the world. And we've got JT Fox, and I think he's all about emotion. I mean, he links up with his friends with the Trumps. He's, you know, his Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's one of the guys I was talking about earlier that's coming into this country, calls himself the world #1 real estate and business coach.
Gosh.
And both Scott and myself have been exposed to him. So these are the guys who are coming in the country, and there's yourself, of course, and we look forward to, you know, seeing your scenario. We've got John Chin, part of Scott's team there. He's also a real estate mogul. He's written a book. He's a property specialist. He knows a lot other markets, which Dolph, for example, hasn't invested in. And then we got in Cape Town, we got Yanni Mouton. I mean, he's a billionaire entrepreneur. I loved his story because he read the book Think and Grow Rich, because he was fired when he was 48 years old. He didn't know where to turn. He picked up this book. But I think more important, you actually said it earlier on, you've got to start taking action on things. And that's what he did. He read the book, took the action, probably used the emotion and that kind of thing. So then, of course, we've got, is there another slide there, Scott, with all the other ones that you've got? Cesar Gabalana, he's going to be up in Johannesburg. And Cesar only became a billionaire. I mean, he owns the fund Robosis. And it's more than 4 billion, I think, rand, and you know that only really happened in the last year or two. Then we've got gold and silver oil trading experts. That should be quite interesting from the UK. We've got Kate Moodley, also, you know, South African businesswoman. Gordon McKay, who's an entrepreneur. He's a multimillionaire local investor, doing small things but making a big impact. Yeah. You know, as an investor. So yeah, so for everybody tonight, I think what we said would, you know, those people that have come on the webinar tonight, we will have a special for you.
Neil, just before you Neil, just before you get into the special, I just wanted to add to that. I just wanted to share with everyone a little story from last year when you invited Clem and Dolph and Robin Banks, and I thought it was one of the best days where such high-powered speakers were on the stage all in one day. And I want to share with you a little story. You know, I was in Cape Town and in Johannesburg, and it was very interesting. There were no children. No one under the age of 18 was at any of the events, except for Johannesburg, where there were three children, 3 girls. And interestingly enough, actually, our business partner in Wealth Migrate, Henny Besaidnout, his 3 daughters were there, aged 12, 14, and 19. And I found it fascinating that they were the only 3 children at the workshop. And I said to him, it was like a Tuesday and a Thursday, and I said to him, just a matter of interest, you know, how come your kids are here and not at school? And he said, Scott, surely they're going to get more knowledge and more lessons from the likes of Clem, Dolph, and Robin than they're going to learn from their science or geography teacher in one day. And I just wanted to share that with you before you even start talking about specials and stuff. Because when you take the fact that Henny is seriously wealthy, not just in money, but clearly in mindset, that he wants to empower his children to come and learn from the best, you know, not only locally, but internationally. And I just thought that was something, you know, so special, basically. And I wanted to share it. I actually forgot to share it last night, and I want to share it tonight. So hopefully give more parents the opportunity to make those right decisions, next week and the week after at your events. And just before you get onto the special as well, I wanted to say we're obviously launching this book in terms of property going global. And it's very much based on Clem's methodologies in terms of the scenario. It's what he was talking about in February. And I did promise everyone I'd write a book. And I must admit, Clem, I've got great respect for you writing so many books, because it really is a lot more difficult than it sounds. But we'll also be running through our USA Investor Club and what we'll be doing there. And then also our USA buyers trips, where we take people over to America. We show them all around. So for those of you who come to the Wealth Masterclass, we can go into that in a lot more detail. But Neale, tell us about your exciting opportunity that you've got for people who are online tonight.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the bookings are flowing very quickly. I mean, in fact, our numbers are doubled compared to last year, where we had much smaller audience, and it's really, and I just think it's just the quality of the speakers that we have. I don't think we've had so many A players under one roof. From an entrepreneurship, from investment, from mindset. In fact, there's one I haven't mentioned, and I think this guy is a game breaker. I've met him on one occasion. His name is David Becker, and he's the personal coach for Lewis Pugh. And I think for those who don't know who Lewis Pugh is, he's the guy that's from the Antarctic, and he's got a personal coach. And this guy works on the subconscious. And you use the scenario of Henny's 3 children. In fact, I had a couple of people ringing me up and said, Neale, last year I attended your Wealth Masterclass event, and everything that I learned in the day was absolutely changed my life. And one particular individual we know, Scott, he took action on absolutely everything. I mean, he attended the Robin Banks events, and then he moved on to one step higher, and he invested in your properties, and he looked at all the scenarios of Clem as well, but I think essentially used the emotion, took the action, and has got the results. So I think this is the purpose of this whole event, is really it can be life-changing to many people. And so I think it's very fortunate to be able to see under one roof in one day, and to get so much information that you can actually use and take action on. I mean, it's one thing just sitting there and taking notes. That's another thing sitting there taking notes and thereafter taking the action. And it's clear that the people that do take the action, they get the results, and they're also the ones that make the difference as well. So just to reiterate that this event it's next Thursday. It's in fact today a week. It's at the Bay Hotel in Camps Bay in Cape Town on the 5th of September. It starts at registration around about 7 o'clock. It'll probably be official start at 8:30. And then in Johannesburg, it's on Tuesday, the 10th of September, and it's at the Sandton Convention Center, and same time starts. And what we've got is a special for the people that have come on the webinar today, and we've got a 2-ticket special. So what we're offering today is our normal ticket price is 1,250 for a general ticket, or 2,750 for a VIP ticket. So what we're offering today is 2 tickets for the price of 3,750 on the VIP side of things, which means that you get all the product that's included. I mean, there's a number of books that we've got from, for example, the likes of Dolph Touris, there's Gordon McKay. In fact, I think your book is an ebook. Scott has also been thrown in as well. And
dude, I've been nearly killing myself and trying to kill Clem actually to get him to do the forward, but killing myself to get it ready in time for you.
Yeah, well, look, I think whether we give it to them on the day, Scott, or whether we give it them afterwards, I don't think I don't think anybody would mind. I think the most important is they would like to see the book at some particular stage, maybe just after the event. That's also not a bad idea. So
it'll be ready.
Keep pushing.
It'll be ready. I've got enough emotion behind it. I've taken action.
Great. Okay, so there's the list of everything, what you're getting for the VIP tickets. And for those people that have already bought tickets, you can upgrade. So in other words, if you bought a ticket for 2,750 per ticket, all you have to do is pay the additional 1,000 Rand. You can bring an additional person, and they would also get all the product that goes along with that. So you can upgrade, no problem. You can do that on both tickets. and it is filling up fast. So really, I think this is the day you've got to take action. We've been talking about taking action, and we're going to keep this offer until 3 o'clock tomorrow. And you can do a couple of things right now. You can actually phone Nicolette on a cell phone right now. Her name is Nicolette. And you can either email her, Nicolette, NICOLETTE at realemedia.co.za, and or you can call her on her cell right now on 076 463 9405, and she will reserve your seats. And you know, with VIP, you get the front seating and everything. And I know the VIP tickets are the ones which are actually selling really, really fast. Or you can also send to Scott, as long as we get it by 3 p.m. Tomorrow afternoon. Really take action. I think it's really going to be an awesome event. We've had a fantastic response, and it could be life-changing for you all. So those are all the contact details there. There's the number of websites. If you want to have a look at the video, want a bit more information, go to www.wealthmasterclass.co.za. You can even do the booking online if you like. There's a video there. We got with with all the speakers. Gives you all the information there, or you can go to the REIM or even the IPS Invest site, or even the Wealth Migrate site. So I think pretty much that's the offer is there for everybody, and we hope to see you all there. And I don't know if you want to add anything, Scott or Clem, to this particular. I think it's been a pleasure chatting. I think I've certainly learned some more, and I always learn every single time. So thank you very much for the opportunity, or giving us the opportunity prior. We look forward to seeing you at the Wealth Masterclass in both Cape Town and Johannesburg, and we look forward to seeing the different scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to also comment on those 3 kids that attended, which is that if one institution has not adapted like a fox to the changes in the world, it's the educational institutions, because most schools are still teaching their pupils for the job market that existed in the 1960s and 1970s, which is now entirely different because of technological change driving a stake through many jobs in big business, but equally because of the hard times. Most kids nowadays are going to have to become entrepreneurs, but are there any schools that are actually teaching kids to be entrepreneurs? The answer is no. And so, yeah, I totally agree with the idea that kids should come along and learn how to make money, because they're going to have to create a job rather than get a job. And I look forward to presenting at this workshop.
Fantastic.
Clem, well, listen, it's been an honor and a privilege. I know from Neale and I's perspective, we're extremely grateful that you've driven all the way through from Simonstown to Neale's office in Claremont. You know, anyone who lives in Cape Town knows that that's a fair old journey. So we do really appreciate
it. Driving rain.
Yeah, in the Cape Town storms. What did you call it? I wrote it down here: frequency of extreme events.
Yes.
But no, thank you very much. And I do say on behalf of everyone who's actually online tonight, it's always an honor and a privilege. So many of you have come online. Thank you for all the questions. I do really apologize. We just don't have time. Clem has to get back all the way to Simonstown, so we don't have time tonight for questions. But do come along to the Wealth Masterclass where we'll be able to answer. Kanantha, I'm not sure if I spelled your name right. You said, pity you're not coming to Durban. Do come up to our event in Joburg or Cape Town. And if not, Neale and I might have some surprises for people in Durban from a streaming perspective. So watch that space. And we will be having our USA Investor Breakfast next Wednesday on the 4th of September if you do want to come and see us in Durban. So for those of you, do watch out. But Neale, thanks for organizing. As always, an honor and a privilege. And it's been a lot of interesting information shared. And I must admit, I'm super pumped about the next 2 weeks and your events and learning from some of the best, both locally and internationally. It really is going to be exciting.
It is. Well, thank you, everybody. I think it's really been educational. It's been inspiring. And all I can say is good night. Have a wonderful time. And we will hopefully see you all at the Wealth Masterclass. So good night, everybody.
And may the fox be with you.
Good night, guys.
Good night.